protection programs can access education and vice versa. We recognize that if we focus on improving well-being in family and community ecologies, and I know Rachel later will talk a little bit about the social ecological model. If we look at focusing on well-being, improving well-being, that can also improve learning outcomes. And critically, I think for donor colleagues we might have on the call, we found that integration was cost effective because it prevents duplication. And also if we're preventing children slipping through the gaps, it prevents us having to restart programs with children who are suffering worse outcomes because they haven't been served through integrated or joint programming. And critically, within the humanitarian world, the new way of working encourages working across humanitarian development nexus. And whilst colleagues in education and child protection very often work across that nexus anyway, naturally, integrated working can also encourage that. It also aligns with the locally led approaches, the emphasis on localization, to take control, design of programming down to community level to really meet the needs of the affected population. So all these findings gave us really the seeds for developing the guidance note, and I'll speak about that very shortly, and then I'll also hand over to Rachel to take us through the guidance note to help us understand how it's structured and use it. But first, I just wanted to touch on ICRC's role. Many of you on the call may not recognize or realize that ICRC works in the education sector. And I think one of the first things to note is that we don't intend to be a major education emergencies provider. So we're never going to be a kind of a Save the Children, a UNICEF, IRC, but we do have some real added value to the sector. And that added value is our access. ICRC only works in situations of conflict, other situations of violence, mainly armed conflict context. And in these areas, because of our role in upholding international humanitarian law, we have what we call dialogue with weapons bearers. So we speak to the people with guns, the people with bombs, and we negotiate with them to try and help them understand the implications, the humanitarian consequences of conflict on education. And in some cases, very successfully able to help protect education in that way through that dialogue. We also have access to frontline areas or areas perhaps under control of non-state armed groups where other agencies can't access. So it's this access to the parties to conflict, to areas that other people don't serve, where we have some real added value. So in these areas, we use our expertise in international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions and additional protocols, as well as our direct humanitarian response through protection assistance programs to protect and support safe access to education in conflict and other situations of violence. And the rationale behind this aligns with the rationale behind this whole joint project between INE and the Alliance. But we recognize that education is a protected service. It protects children we work with, and it prevents their exposure to further risks. As well as improving the slides jumped around. As well as improving the mental well-being and healthy development, we know that when children in school, it reduces the risk of abuse and exploitation, such as child labor, child marriage, sexual abuse, child recruitment. We also know that education systems allow delivery of other services, so health services, social services, school feeding programs, water distribution, and these all contribute towards protection outcomes. Overall, education provides hope, resilience, stability, and helps mitigate the risk of armed conflict and violence in the future. There's a correlation between higher education levels and lower violence in communities. Not always the case, as we see in some tragic conflicts occurring in the world to date. But in general, that correlation is there. So we recognize that investing in education, investing in the community can help promote stability and reduce violence. Before I hand over, before I discuss the guidance note, I just wanted to flag the very clear criteria that ICRC has. We only engage in protection of education when education is directly affected by armed conflict and violence, So we wouldn't, for example, build a school where there was no school there before, or repair a school where there was no school. But if we're in an area where school has been destroyed by conflict, then we would consider rehabilitating that school so education can continue. We only respond where there are few other actors with capacity to respond. So again, we wouldn't respond if a major education actor was there delivering education services. Or we might respond where it's part of our protection response to particularly vulnerable groups. So children associated with armed forces or children with disabilities. I just wanted to be clear on our criteria for engagement. And before I hand over to Rachel now, I mentioned that the findings from our project, one of the key findings were the need for practitioner-focused guidance, so a practical tool which gave guidance on ways of working together between the sectors, gave some guiding principles and some key resources. And so this was pulled together into a toolkit which became a guidance note. It's important to note this is grounded in the INEE minimum standards and the child protection minimum standards. So throughout the guidance note, you'll see references to both standards, in particular where they overlap and complement each other. It's also complementary to a collaboration framework that was developed a few years ago by the Global Education Cluster and the Child Protection Area of Responsibility. We developed both frameworks kind of in tandem, working closely with each other. And that framework is focused on coordination between sectors. And then when you're talking about implementation, joint and integrated programming, that framework also refers to the INEE guidance note. So they're not in any way contradictory, they're complementary pieces of work. And when used together, can help national response in child protection and education emergencies be coordinated and encourage joint and integrated programming. So very happy to be here to be introduced the background to the development of this wonderful resource. I'd like to now hand over to Rachel, who'll take you through the resource itself and explain how it's structured and how you can use it. Thank you, Etienne.
Oops, thanks, Mark. I realize that the sun has come up since I logged on. And you may also hear, unfortunately, a dog barking in the background. Apologies in advance. So welcome everyone again. Wonderful to have everyone focused on this guidance note that so many people and organizations contributed to. As Mark mentioned, the expectation is not to replace anything, but rather supplement what's already there. So the expectation is that everyone who is picking up the guidance note and hoping to use it for their programming is already familiar with and able to use existing sector standards, the two minimum standards, child protection minimum standards and INEE minimum standards being the two that are core to this, but of course intersect with other standards as well. We expect that all of us are working within the relevant coordination systems and that we're familiar with and can apply the relevant competency frameworks as we move through and support a variety of stakeholders to support the actual integrated programming. The principles, so I wanted to start so my role in all of this is to orient you to the actual guidance note, to the physical resource or the virtual resource as it's posted on both websites, on the Alliance and INEE. First, just as a reminder, the principles that are underpinning this guidance note are reminders of the programming approaches and the components that are required to really support an intentional, responsible, accountable system for children affected by conflict, by crisis, through our integrated and joint programming. These principles can be applied to both joint and integrated programming. Next slide, please. I think we skipped a slide. Yes, thank you. As Mark mentioned, the guidance note really leans into both sets of standards. So the backbone of the guidance note, what we hope that you will see throughout our reference to reference to the actual standards, but also how we hold ourselves accountable to meeting those standards, uplifting the rights of children and the protection of children, regardless of what sector you are grounded in or primarily grounded in, and how you intersect. We hope that both sectors, individuals, stakeholders from both sectors, education and child protection, will see themselves and be familiar or find the layout of this guidance note familiar enough that you can easily work through it. But just quickly, a table of contents shows you the points of intersection. Please go back to thank you. The points of intersection of both of the sectors. And of course, there are many, many ways that we see where and how the sectors do come together in our responses. This guidance note is meant to lift up and amplify the specific points and provide guidance highlighting the opportunities and needs of joint and integrated programming in each of these areas. This is not an exhaustive list. This list could probably be expanded twice its length, but it's a starting point. Mark had also mentioned that the guidance note and the way that we often work is based on the socioecological model. If we agree between the sectors that the child is center to all of our work, the centrality of child and child protection is center to our work, then of course we're going to find the child nestled in these protective barriers and these protective rings within which we are supporting a variety of programs. We also understand that the child has agency, and we want through this guidance note to remind and be mindful of and support the agency of the child to be fully engaged in and own their role in learning, in participating in learning and participating in their own protection and well-being as well as that of others. We know, of course, that children are hopefully and primarily within a family or caregiving situation, and that's nestled within a larger community. But between the family and the community, the unique space that many of us operate in and support is in the learning environment. And the guidance note does not only focus on the learning environment, but certainly lifts up and amplifies the way that we can better and strengthen our support, regardless of where and how we are working as individual stakeholders. Yeah, so the way that the guidance note is organized, each of the sections that you can find in the guidance note and the content list that was in the previous slide has an introduction that is meant to be, thank you, you can stay on this slide, meant to be fairly succinct. It is not meant to reproduce information already in the minimum standards, but rather to hone in on the unique areas and opportunities and needs within a particular sort of programming space or programming component. Next slide, please. And apologies if this is not making sense, but I'm hopeful that if you, as soon as you're able to log into the actual document, you'll see the progression of this, and it'll click into place. But within each of the overarching sections of integration, we have then subsections, and I use the example of the safe learning environment and access routes as an example. The way that we have organized information is by socio-ecological model levels. So we move through from policy, so that protective layer, down to the child layer, and at each level we ask questions that should both stimulate conversations between the two sectors, challenge us to think about how we can both support the integration of programs, regardless of whether it's joint programming or integrated programming. Along with the questions, we've compiled a list of indicators drawing from a number of sources beyond INEE and Child Protection and the Alliance, but also, obviously inclusive of the indicators that we have amassed. But we're looking across the entire sector at relevant indicators that would allow us to begin to understand how we can first identify need, but then also measure progress made against that identified need. Can you move to the next slide? And I apologize for the how quick we are moving through the organization of the guidance note, but I'm hopeful that this is making sense. First, you have an introduction to a particular area of work, then you have a subsection. The subsection has by socioecological levels, a list of questions, guiding questions to stimulate conversation, the indicators that would allow you to measure, jointly measure. And then at the end of each of the subsections, there's a list of resources, existing resources that are that were compiled and vetted by a number of experts that were sitting on the Child Protection and EIE advisory group that sat between the two sectors. Mark had mentioned this advisory group being instrumental in setting this work forward, but there were a number of people who helped both pull up the relevant resources, but also indicate which are the priority resources, the relevant sections that really hone in on how and when and why and where we might strengthen our integrated programming. And those are available on both websites in all of the languages here. And I welcome any questions in the Q&A section in the chat as well, but preferably in the Q&A. We are happy to run through at an organizational level and a stakeholder level if you have questions about the actual guidance note itself. But without taking further time, I'd like to pass to Riyadh, who's going to talk through his wonderful program to support Syrian children and the communities there. Riyadh?
Thank you very much, Rachel. I hope you can hear me and see me well. My name is Riyadh, and I work for Harass Network, which is a national Syrian NGO working on children's rights. And we have been working on integrating child protection in education for years now. While the guidance note is newly released and not piloted maybe yet in a specific context, I can speak about different ways we have applied and lessons learned from our implementation, where we can really see connection between the guidance note and what we are doing on the field. If we can go back one slide, please. Yes, so maybe before I do that, from the field perspective, why is this guidance note important? Why is integrating child protection education important? The first thing we can clearly see on the field is building resilience, and resilience mainly is built through working on social skills and coping mechanisms. And schools today is like one of the biggest places where you can access children during a conflict or like a humanitarian setting, and having access to those children, working with them on child protection issues or maybe BSS sessions would help building their resilience and coping mechanisms. The other thing is the holistic support. While we can see like in traditional education systems, we mainly focus on educating children, but we ignore other aspects of their social life and social skills and special needs that they may need at specific time. Integrating child protection into education would give us the chance to address those needs, and schools would serve as also an entry point with the community, where you can really get access to most vulnerable children and respond to their needs. The third and maybe most important one is the sustainable change we can trigger in the community. We've been doing this for 10 years now, and I can tell you that now it's the community has changed. It's not like how it was 10 years ago. And basically, we're now getting more questions regarding child protection in schools, child safeguarding, which was like a new concept introduced to the community, to our community, at least in Syria, 10 years ago. So it can change the community, it can change their perspective of how to protect children, the children's rights, especially in schools. And again, as I said, like schools would serve as a great entry point with the community and give you access to lots of children. If we can move to the next slide, please. No, the one before. All right, so now I will start with some examples that we have implemented in terms of integrating child protection in education. You can see from the title of this one, for those who have got the chance to go through the guidance notes, we have a special section on enabling interventions and approaches, which is, I believe it's section 3. And there you can read more about how to do that and why is it important. For a starter, we thought immediately about the protecting children inside of our facilities. So child safeguarding has been a huge area of focus for us. And we tried to implement it not only in schools, but we also got a level up to implement it on the educational authorities level in northern Syria in over 300 schools. And basically, child protection and child safeguarding would really connect in lots of areas. So this is also an area that is very interesting in the guiding note, especially when it comes to referral and reporting mechanisms in schools. The other thing is also under the same section, you can read more about it, which is like I would connect it more towards the multi-sectoral referrals. And here, what we try to do is to have one child protection focal point in each school, which would serve as a main contact with the children, would help in identifying children that are most vulnerable, so they can be referred to specialized services in case management settings, or within the school if we have we need any remedial programs or non-formal education, for example. Those officers, which we call them child safeguarding officers, they would be in a child-friendly space inside the school. And in this space, each child would have a one session a week where they go to this place, they receive psychosocial support, they receive different awareness raising activities. And yeah, we can access, we can identify children who would need like specialized attention. The third thing is inclusion. And this is also, I think it's in section 3, it's 3.3, inclusion of children with disabilities. In those spaces also, we try to have a resource room where children with special needs and disabilities would receive special education, and then also would be referred to case management in case they have any special needs that needs more attention. Can you move to the next slide, please? Another also area of focus in the guidance notes is safe access and protective learning environment. And here you don't need to, we need also to think about other external factors when it comes to protecting children. As you know, in Syria, it is a war zone in northern Syria. So we have lots of airstrikes, shelling. So we try to implement an early warning system in each school where it is based on AI. It can predict the movement of a jet, basically, and would give warning to children, which take us to point 2. All children and personnel are trained on safe evacuation and safety training for the staff to deal with emergency settings. So this is also another area that you can read about in the guidance note, and would be very important, especially in terms of conflicts. The last thing that I would talk about here is the community participation and meaningful participation of children, which is also a big area in the guidance note. It's in section 2. You can read more about it. It is always important to keep children and families engaged in your work. You need to hear more from them. So the integration that you are doing is more meaningful and really reflect the views and priorities of the community. So what we have done in schools is supporting the establishment of parent-teacher associations, so we can keep parents actively participating in whatever issues we have, any major priorities that the school should maybe take care of. We also supported schools parliaments, where we have children electing special committees so they can maybe reflect also their needs, participate with the management of the schools in prioritizing special areas of focus. They have also the right to say, we want to come maybe in the morning, maybe in the afternoon. So they participate in managing their daily life in the school. The last area was also how to engage children in our work. So we went through an exercise of turning most of our documents into child-friendly language, and then child-friendly posters and coloring books. So basically every single poster you have seen throughout the presentation is from a child-friendly poster or language. And here, this is an example of a child-friendly code of conduct. It's in Arabic. For those who speak Arabic, they would understand. But we try to tackle like special and sensitive areas through like a child-friendly mechanism. So we keep children basically safe, and then we give them the opportunity to understand what we do and provide feedback if needed. This was everything I wanted to say today, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Shukran, Riyad. Thank you very much. And we have the chat. Please feel free to ask Riyad questions in the chat. Meanwhile, we are handing over the floor to Camila. Camila, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope that you hear me well. So thank you for the opportunity to join this discussion, an important one on integrated approaches to education and child protection, and to present ECHO work in this particular area, ECHO as a donor and the donor perspective. So this is my role today. We have heard quite a lot already about the mutually reinforcing role of education and child protection that leads to better outcomes, to resilience, to sustainable change. And this is exactly what DG ECHO is promoting and supporting. So we have clear references to integrated approaches in our policies, but also in our programming documents, to have this child-centered approach, but also to address the needs of learners and communities. I think that when we joined the work on this particular guidance note that we are launching today with this webinar, we had some initial reservation as a donor to what extent we do need yet another guidance document at the global level and how helpful this will be. So now that the guidance is there, we clearly see the added value, also in terms of clarifying the concepts of providing a reference document with relevant support resources, with clear why and how to implement integrated programming. So thank you very much for this work. It will be extremely helpful also as a reference document for us, together with the Global Education Cluster CPA or our framework. So in terms of ECHO work on integrated programming, we do indeed encourage our partners to implement integrated programs whenever possible in when the context is leading to that. Because it provides a cohesive and holistic approach. We see that 66% of our projects in education have already some integrated child protection activities. We also see an increase, a steady increase over years of projects that implement child safeguarding activities within education. So that's overall very encouraging. At the same time, we know that implementing integrated approaches requires capacities of partners. Not all partners have child protection and education experts. This requires also resources in terms of effort, in terms of time. So that's why we are also here to support that. And it requires coordination. And I think this is also an important element that we need to touch upon, because coordination bodies are instrumental in supporting these efforts to assess, to set strategic priorities, to support the design, the implementation, monitoring, but also then to take lessons learned from the process. And I think that even now for us, we are internally discussing how to strengthen the integrated programming. And we clearly see the need of concrete examples, best practices, as we have heard from Syria, to also overcome some limits that exist from the donor perspective and partner perspective to integrated programming, and to see how to better also work with the enablers to child-centered holistic approaches. Next slide, please. So just to give you a couple of very practical examples of what we do. So protection and the centrality of protection is really the key message for our humanitarian aid. And we have also included a dedicated protection result in our education emergency policy framework, really to ensure that we do not harm. We know that education is part of the solution to provide better hope, to provide resilience, but learning spaces can also be a source of risk to children and education personnel. And I think we do need specialized expertise in child protection in order for this learning to be safe, to contribute to well-being of children, to provide them with life-saving skills, to respond to school-based gender violence, to deal with the negative coping mechanism, to support also the caregivers in their role, to support training for teachers, notably in psychosocial support, to also have some psychosocial support activities integrated into classrooms. Now, we have very recently also supported a dedicated toolkit to address rapid and strengthen rapid education response within the first 3 months of the emergency onset. And when we look at what is in this toolkit that is now at the Global Education Cluster website, we see mainly protective activities in this very first stage of emergency. So we see safe and protective environment, we see psychosocial well-being, life-saving role of education, and creating this sense of stability and normality that is so important for children, to enable them to continue that later on with learning. We have supported also, as an example, 2 strategic programmatic partnerships dealing specifically with integrated programming, encompassing education, child protection, mental health, and psychosocial support. The first example is a program implemented in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger by Save the Children, which just ended after 3 years of implementation with excellent results, also related to rapid response or localization. The second example I would like to share has been implemented by IRC in Nigeria, Niger, and Cameroon, when they implemented a project dealing with access to formal, non-formal education, but also supporting caregivers, communities, and building capacities of teachers and facilitators in child protection measures. Next slide, please. And I will very briefly, because I know that time is running and we have still some questions in the chat to answer. So some maybe final messages from our side. I think that what this guidance note is good is to provide overall resource and to guide us in the implementation, but we need really to have a contextualized and locally implemented projects adapted to the context, and that's an extremely important point to keep in mind. At the same time, we see the added value and the importance to keep the knowledge sharing, the technical collaboration, but also advocacy at the global level, to really communicate on the importance of the integrated approaches, and to maintain the momentum and maintain the gains that have been reached in the joining forces between education and child protection experts. My third point will be that the integrated approaches go beyond child protection and education. If we really want to implement, to put child in the center of our programming, we should also go to reach to our other sectors, notably health or nutrition, water, sanitation, shelter, etc. So I think that's an important also element to keep in mind. And last but not least, we shouldn't forget about all the intersectional vulnerabilities of children. So they are linked to gender, they are linked to disability, but they are also linked to age. Children vary in age and they have specific needs that also should be better reflected when we address them from both education and child protection angle. And that would be my final message. So thank you very much.
I want to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers. I wish we had the whole day, but we don't. We only had 1 hour. So they have given us a lot to work with. So there is this is a journey which we have started, and we'll have to continue with the journey for a long time. Thank you for those who've asked questions. Most of those have been answered. I think the only one that hasn't been answered is around continuous support. I think Maureen is asking, do we have support from the team in terms of those who are, for those who are working on projects that are integrating both child protection and education? Any panelists to address this?
I can step in briefly on behalf of INEE.
Sure.
I mean, I think both networks, of course, we have focal points who are willing to respond to questions, but it goes beyond our mandate and capacity to support on specific proposal development. But of course, we would welcome any question, especially if it is in response to having read the guidance note and a particular question on how one might adapt the guidance note to a particular context. I think we would be very, very open to discussing what that might look like. There were several other questions on, Patricia has asked as well in Q&A, whether we would be considering a similar guidance note that looks specifically at MHPSS, noting, of course, that this is where not only child protection and education, but also health and mental health are really strongly strongly committed to supporting children and their caregivers, but also held accountable to that. And I think that's a great question, one that we will certainly take up in another space. Thank you, Patricia. There were a couple of other questions on, Acheng, if you don't mind, that came in on the next steps for the guidance note and our collaboration. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk through that, unless you and Allison wanted to take that on.
We just have 1 minute
Okay.
to the end of our session.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just briefly, I'll take 30
you
seconds.
Want to take that minute or
Sure.
half a minute? Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
As noted, we the two sectors and the two networks are very closely connected, and we are recommitting ourselves to supporting the integration of child protection and education. And I think that was made clear in the recent GRF pledge that both of our networks made. But following that, of course, the guidance note and the dissemination and rollout of the guidance note is going to be the focus in the next year plus. And we will be reaching out and sharing more information with you. But there is a desire, of course, to collaborate with the GEC and CPAOR on this, as well as individual organizations and stakeholders. We are currently, Allison is helping us pull together for the benefit of both networks, a joint initiative paper that would outline some of the next steps for the continued support to integrated programming. And that would be some iteration, some version of that would be made available on both of our network websites. And we are hoping to really re-energize this space. So please do look for additional information and opportunities to engage. We are ready to really think about how we can best support the actual responses. Thank you. That was more than 30 seconds.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. You will pay a fine after this. No worry. Yes, so thank you, everyone. We've come to the end of our session. I think the most important person in our discussion is the child, and the socio-economical, ecological model ensures that we do that. We put the child at the center of what we do in the humanitarian sector. So thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you in other forum that the INI and the Alliance will put in place to try and take this forward. Thank you, shukran, obrigado, obrigada, asanteni sana. Bye for today.